Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for making the time to join today's event. I am Diego Arrea, and I am the CEO of Global Americans. Welcome to a new edition of the Americas Desk. For this edition, we're going to focus on Venezuela. Today's event has one goal. We want to bring capital, execution, and people into the same conversation because none of them can rebuild the country alone. This is also an opportunity to listen and understand how we can keep supporting the incredible initiatives that have emerged since the earthquake, the ones you will hear about today. With that, let me take a few minutes to set the stage. Since January 3rd, something real shifted in Venezuela's trajectory. Sanctions architecture moving, oil recovering, US investors landing in Caracas for the first time in years. Venezuela had momentum, and Venezuelans had something we hadn't had in a while: hope about the trajectory of the country. Then the earthquake hit, and it hit hard. In the aftermath, the world witnessed some of the most remarkable things we have seen in the hours after the event. Private companies kept moving without waiting for permission. Diaspora networks organizing rosters of engineers and doctors within hours. Chambers of commerce coordinating across borders like it was second nature. That is not a coincidence. And it's not only resilience, it is the Venezuelan people. The country's greatest asset was never oil or geography. It's always been the talent of Venezuelans at home and abroad. And this earthquake put that on full display when it matters most. And there's something bigger underneath that. The country started trusting its own capacity to organize, respond, and build without waiting to be told how. That's the real story of crisis and opportunity. The hardest moment is exactly when the country proved what it's capable of. What we watched unfold after June 24th wasn't luck. It was proof of concept of something bigger. Private sector, diaspora capital, civil society networks, professional associations, all connecting on their own overnight without a convener. The proof of concept is powerful, but someone builds the institutionality around it. That's the work in front of us, and that's exactly why today's conversation matters. I want you to hear today's conversation not as three separate panels, but as one story about where the country is headed, told from three angles. We start with capital, the banks, sovereign advisors, and regional institutions who are right now mapping their exposure and deciding on what terms they engage. From there, we move to execution, the Venezuelan companies that never stop operating, that build the muscle to move fast before anyone else did. And what that tells us about this country can deliver once the conditions are right. And we close with the people, the civic networks and diaspora that activated in hours, not weeks, and are the clearest evidence yet of what organized Venezuelans can build together. Capital, execution, and people. With that, let me hand it over to our first panel, moderated by Alberto Blohm, Vice President of the Venezuelan's National Council for Investment Promotion, CONAPRI, and Senior Advisor at Global Americans. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diego, and thank you, Global Americans, for organizing this. It's a laudable initiative that started before the earthquake, thinking about the future of our country in the Venezuela 2040 series. Thank you all for coming today. Our panel will be tackling the capital perspective from four different angles. We will have Ángel Cárdenas, General Manager of Infrastructure for CAF. Ángel will be taking a more upper view of telling us what the multilateral sector is going to be looking at as the capital deployment and the risk factors. Victoria Nogueroles, Director of International and Correspondent Banking in Banco Nacional de Crédito, one of the nation's biggest banks. She will be talking about the hurdles and opportunities that the domestic domestic banking sector is facing. And Alejandro Arreaza, Latin American economist for Barclays, arguably the Venezuelan knows most about our debt and sovereign risk. As Diego set the stage before in the earthquake, let's remember that on June 23rd, this was a country that was nearing more than a decade of a humanitarian crisis, a void of capital. That morning, it was announced that the debt stock would be around $240 billion in an economy that is estimated to be 110 billion. The domestic banking sector's total loan portfolio is 3 billion or 3% of GDP versus 30% of the rest of Latin America. Discount rates for equity upwards of 25 and defaulted since 2017 with no access to international markets and more than 4 billion arrears in multinationals. And that was on June 23rd. So Angel, Victoria, Alejandro, thank you so much for coming here. Each from your individual vantage point, I would ask you for 2 minutes. What is the biggest obstacle that from your capital stack perspective, the country is facing now? And Victoria, if it's okay, we'll start with you. 2 minutes. Okay.
Hello, good morning to everyone. Thank you for your time and for joining us today. And thank you, Global Americans, for this initiative, which I believe it's very necessary. So when we talk about the biggest structural obstacle in Venezuela right now, I believe it's not really, we've all heard of the amount and figure that represents the reconstruction after the earthquake. But the biggest obstacle, I would believe, that Venezuela domestic banking system has spent years optimizing for survival and the compliance, to have those international standards to be compliant, not necessarily absorption and deployment. So really the obstacle isn't the size of the damage, is that our banking system was built for survival and not necessarily velocity. And this has been because of the reasons that many of you may know, which are the sanctions and the instability that has trained us to hold capital safely and not to move fast. So correspondent lines are pretty thin, reserves are locked by design, and there's really no domestic precedent for financing reconstruction at the scale that we're talking about right now. That's the real gap that capital runs into today in Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Victoria. With many seconds to spare, Alejandro, can we talk about the biggest hurdles from your vantage point, please? Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you for the introduction. Look, from the market perspective, clearly the fact that the country remains in default since 2017 is an important obstacle that limits the ability for the private sector to get engaged in the situation. No? However, I think there are additional obstacles that still prevent a solution, or that could be headwinds in reaching a solution for this particular issue, including the limitations in terms of data, the lack of a credible and consistent fiscal plan, and also the need to have secure sources of financing that could support the recovery of the country in the current conditions. No, as much as the market might be willing to provide some help and relief to the country in the current conditions, I will say that only multilateral organizations are the ones that could have the capacity to provide funding in the magnitude that Venezuela might need in the current juncture. No, so from that perspective, I think a source of potential support will be critical to come from the multilaterals.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. This is setting up to be a very non-Venezuelan panel, as we are having a lot of excess time. So, Angel, I give the floor to you.
So just to make up for
Feel free.
Victoria and Alejandro, I might actually jump into 3 hurdles that I think are important to keep in mind. And thank you, Global Americans, Diego and Alberto, for having us here. I think any opportunity to talk about the Venezuelan situation is key. So I think the first one, it's about a coordination effort. And it's I mean, crises like this have to be thought in different stages, and to be broken down of understanding that there is an emergency response and then an early response, and then probably a third one that is more of the reconstruction. And all of these stages have different way to be approach. And for that, there is a huge need of coordination efforts. Diego at the beginning was saying how the Venezuelan society came forward and did an amazing job. Well, I think that amazing job has to remain, because in order to coordinate the response, and more importantly, to think strategically as we move forward in the reconstruction, is key. And that would require commitment not only from the private sector, the public sector, and of course the civil society. And that's key. If that doesn't happen, I mean, the early emergency response will just be that early emergency response. You need to have a plan. And to that, it really helps if you can coordinate. And international experience tells you about coordination efforts are key in that. And the second one, and it's how do you sequence that response? Because I mean, you're going to come to some priorities, but you need to be able to understand what comes first. And that is a challenge, because I mean, the question is that do you go for housing right away, or do you understand that the reconstruction or rebuilding with opportunities is probably the way forward? And what I mean by reconstruction or rebuilding with opportunities is that you have to make sure that not only you rebuild the infrastructure, but you create economic opportunities at the same time. And that is, of course, a challenging situation, because I mean, our resources are limited, and you need to make decisions and you need to make priorities. And the third one that Alejandro quickly tackled on, it's about accessing financing and the scale of it. I mean, yes, multilaterals would definitely come in and help in that, but I mean, given the initial magnitude of the damages, I think you would require to be more creative on that, because I mean, not even pulling all the multilaterals efforts, I mean, this will require for sure more investment or scale of investments that the country will have to find the creative way to get access to it. So I think those three are probably the initial ones to start the conversation, Alberto.
Thank you very much, Angel. Okay, so we're hearing a private sector, domestic private sector that is extremely small and was designed for survival and trying to insert itself into the international markets despite the imposed hurdles. Alejandro was talking not only about the size of the debt, but credible data, credible fiscal plan, use of funds, auditing of the debt stack, and Angel's three hurdles stemming from a coordination effort. How do you stage it? So from a capital perspective, I know that Angel mentioned a lot about the coordination efforts, putting the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse. How can capital, seeing that we have all of this talent internal and all of this goodwill, both internal and international, how does capital put forward the terms, or what terms does capital need for the coordination, the restructuring, the internal organization, the execution of all of these stages of the recovery, and to eventually be a functioning country again going forward? I know it's a loaded question. It's different than what we had, but your introductions were so well thought out that I think it's a great opportunity of how do we shift the conversation from capital sending, from your own vantage points. It's what it needs to improve the horse.
Alberto, that question is for me, right?
That's for all three of you, from your different vantage points.
But since you volunteer, Victoria, you can go forward.
Please, Victoria.
So when we talk about absorption capacity, let's say locally, today we're not in capacity, not at this scale, right? And why? Especially, I always mention that corresponding banking relationships is like the infrastructure needed. We've seen huge efforts from international and different players and different countries that have had the interest on putting it humanitarian collaboration. But there are a lot of issues that we're facing right now. The corresponding capacity of the local sector, the encaje constraints, and the lack of blended finance instruments, meaning that local banks can intermediate but not underwrite the full risk alone. The banking sector in Venezuela can move quickly on smaller tickets, shorter cycle flows, emergency relief, working capital, maybe a bit of trade finance. But what we cannot do alone is originate the long tenor infrastructure debt reconstruction that's actually needed. So it's not very based on the capacity that we can solve internally. It's truly a design problem that needs a lot of players to collaborate and be part of these reconstruction. We basically, local banks were the last mile of this the financing chain. But we cannot do it alone, right? We need the capital, which we've seen interest and the la voluntad to collaborate, but that's not something that we can fix alone. It requires multilateral and regulators at the table with us to start building instruments designed for this specific load and volumes that we're talking about.
Excellent. Angel, going from the last mile to the mid-mile, and then Alejandro from the macro on the debt overhang. Seeing how Victoria closed, that she needs multilaterals and regulators, why don't we pick up the conversation with you and how you think you, from your vantage point, can help the cart move the horse?
Well, I think the first one, multilaterals should probably come in, and Victoria already kind of pointed out. I mean, it's about, when you think about structures, it's about a long tenor, and at some point, multilaterals become the market makers for this type of a structure to regain, market depth and confidence and absorbing the sovereign risk. So I think it's about, as she pointed out, developing instruments that could go for the long tenors and provide the market making success, so you could showcase and lure back the private sector for this type of transaction, and this will help the banking system to evolve into a more profound or depth market situation. But in order to have that, I think the other one and this is something the capital could dictate the terms, as you're asking your original question, is that you need to have good projects. I mean, you have to, when you talk about priorities and when you talk about sequencing and when you talk about, that long term game of rebuilding a country, you need to have good projects in place. So, you need to spend money in project preparation. It's been discussed publicly. I mean, what's going to happen with La Guaira? Is it going to be rebuilt the way it was? Or is it going to be rebuilt differently with more touristic orientation? What happens with the airport? How is the airport going to be rebuilt? That type of conversation needs to take place, and if you have that conversation and you have good projects, it's highly likely you could develop the financial instruments that could, help you in the long term and provide that market depth that I think Victoria was asking for.
Excellent, Angel. Thank you very much. Very clear, very concise. And Alejandro, as the multilateral struggle to develop these long tenor instruments and create market depth, what are your views with the looming debt overhang that we spoke about? And how can both the debtors and the creditors think about this, understanding also that there's going to be an increase in debt that is anywhere from 2 billion to 30 billion just to be with the official damage reports?
Yeah, sure. No, look, so before the earthquake, we were starting to see some progress in trying to tackle the debt issue, and there were ongoing discussions about the possibility of initiating negotiations with creditors and the presentation of debt sustainability analysis by the advisors that the government hire for this purpose. No, I think with the events of the last few weeks, it's very likely that we see at least a reshaping of that process. No, both in terms of the timing and also in terms of the, let's say, the framework that could potentially be used to advance in the restructuring process. No, hopefully the tragedy that the country has gone through doesn't derail this process, but I think, as you mentioned, I think it adds some additional challenges to the ones that we already had. No. And I think it's important to flag that also in the middle of this situation, what has kind of come into evidence is the multiple fragilities that the country has, no, both in terms of institutions, the social situation, as well as the economic fundamentals. No, I think all of these issues will probably come into the forefront of the discussions, and probably that will demand additional capital, as you are saying, to tackle all this situation. I think in particular the political and social situation after the earthquake seems to be extremely fragile. We have seen recent polls about how perceptions about the interim authorities has changed. And also in the street, there seems to be a lot of frustration with the management of the crisis. No, so within those conditions, I think trying to, let's say, accelerate a response to the social situation becomes critical. No, and as you were saying, I think so. The country was already in a situation in which the debt stock was high. There were large funding needs, and the earthquake crisis would probably increase the amount of the funding needs in the short term. No, a risk that I see there is the temptation that in the middle of the situation that the government is facing right now, it might recur to additional monetary financing, given that it doesn't have many sources of funding, no, which could add additional headwinds for the stabilization process in terms of creating pressures on the inflation side, as well as in terms of the exchange rate, which is something that we'll probably would like to avoid. No, given that situation, I think issues or options like, for example, providing some access to the SDRs that
Alejandro, I'm going to stop you right there, and that was excellent, because now we're going to go on to actually how to put the cart before the horse. I'm going to ask each and one of you to tell me or tell us one or two levers, one or two action points, why, and who do you think should pay heed to this advice that would unlock this capital structure and this free flowing of capital from your own vantage point. Who could ever start? Alejandro, you were already starting on one of them. If you want to continue, then an additional one.
Yes, I can continue with the one that I was just starting to mention. That is the potential access to the SDRs that the government or that the country has at the IMF, that has been there since the pandemic, and so far they haven't been able to access them. So that could be a potential initial source of funding to handle the crisis. I think it will be important also to condition the access to those resources to some potential, say, economic, institutional, and political conditions. For example, when Venezuela was recognized by the IMF in April of this year, there was a discussion about conditioning that to the designation of a new central bank board that was supposed to be structured in mutual agreement among the different stakeholders in the country. I think advancing, for example, on that side, I think that will be something that helps to generate credibility and progress, both in terms of the economics and the political negotiation that the country needs.
So, and who that is addressed to is the authorities here in Venezuela, the IMF itself, and anyone else that can actually.
Yeah,
that
probably
will-
the U.S. government. So given the
Sure.
influence that they also have in the multilateral community, I think could play an important role there.
Excellent. Thank you, Alejandro. Angel, keeping through the flow of capital, one or two levers and why and to whom the request is addressed.
Well, I think the first one, and I'm going to take 20 seconds to promote one of our trust funds that we have launched, the Recovery and Reconstruction Fund that we launched within the first 24 hours to help the country. I think putting in place this type of instruments or vehicles that could channel not only multi-donors and also eventually investment funds would help, to create the right narrative that, capital could flow into the country and it could be deployed and executed. So, because at the end, we structure it because we right away needed to have some sort of like rapid response to the emergency, but our thought was more strategic in the long term, how we want to, help the conversation of how to reconstruct La Guaira and the Caracas corridor in such a way. So that's definitely one. And the other one, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but it's about market making. You need to build confidence in the investors, and for that, you need to provide longer tenors. You need to provide structures that could absorb or reduce the sovereign risk that might be perceived by investors. And I think who can execute that? Not only multilaterals, but I think multilaterals played a role in structuring, political risk umbrellas or structures that could reduce that risk. But it's also about the private sector coming in and taking some risk.
Okay, thank you, Angel. And Victoria, one or two levers, why and to who it should be addressed?
I believe I would focus on two. First, the temporary release or reduction of the legal reserve requirements, specifically for reconstruction tax credit lines. Local banks are sitting on liquidity that's locked by design, which would help on top of multilaterals or any collaboration that we could find from international collaborators. And on the other side, the regulatory window for the reconstruction. So not a broad liquidity release, but a specific treatment for eligible loans, clear rules, traceability, limits, and monitoring. I believe that these are 2 points that need to be addressed by different actors working together. Multilaterals, as Angel mentioned and Alejandro mentioned, and development banks to structure and mobilize the funding, which we can see that's there. But it's vital that regulators create the specific regulatory window and local banks to originate, disperse, monitor, and report, and disperse the liquidity to Venezuelans.
Muchas gracias, Victoria. Well, thank you very much, all three of you. Sorry to change it in the middle. It was a fantastic discussion, very well sequenced as to the pecking order of the capital structure, at least on the debt side. Let's not get into the equity one, but it was fantastic. It was always a pleasure and a privilege being with you. Now, I would like to segue to our second panel and introduce Gabriela Gil. Gabriela is a director and board member of Grupo CGR, a family diversified industrial conglomerate. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Gabriela, all yours.
Thank you, Alberto, for that introduction, and thank you, Global Americans, for being here, for inviting me to be here today. So I'm here to shift our conversation from financial aspect to leadership from the private sector in the years to come in Venezuela's recovery. I'm here joined by Lorena Somoza from Puro Lomo. She's the managing of international finance, and she's going to give us a perspective on the essential foods producers and supply chain specifically. Then we have Agustin Alvarez. Thank you, Agustin, for joining us from Mundo Total, providing us a view on retail operations. And then finally, Maria Alejandra Trujillo from Kingsley Gate, offering us a view of the talent and leadership that we need moving forward. So I'm gonna go right into our first question in terms of how leadership looks like, right? And this particular scenario in the earthquake was a test of how we have been building resilience over the last decade or more than a decade, and building capabilities to respond to crisis management. So taking that in mind, could you share with us, we have 90 seconds for each one of you. Could you share with us what key operational decisions you had to make in the just as soon as the earthquake happened? Maybe Lorena, you can start.
Perfect. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Global Americans. I think that the decision that we made early on wasn't to keep producing at all costs, but rather to halt all operations immediately and ensure our people's safety, also our plant safety in general. Before securing supply chain continuity, we assess plants, equipment, but overall our people and how they were, what each of their specific realities were. And that control pause, inspecting before resuming, that reflects decades of experience in operating Venezuela as instability, honestly. However, it is important to talk about the fact that like speed without safety ends up costing more time, not less. And that's what we've learned over the years. And only once we confirmed that all operations were stable and our people were okay, we resumed production in an orderly and safe manner.
That's great, Lorena. Thank you. We certainly all had to make a pause to see how we were in order to be able to help others, right? So Agustin, maybe you want to build on that?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the opportunity. So we quickly to support our employees directly. We have more than 4,000 people working on stores. The very next day, June 25, we paid all employees their full salary in advance without waiting for the standard and the month cycle. For our stores nationwide, we keep locations affected areas closed. Certified engineering teams could conduct in-person inspections. 3 days later, we launched an initiative to identify employees who had been directly impacted and determine how we could support them, including through donation. That's we do first. We were working on our employees.
Great, Agustin. Thank you for bringing that perspective in terms of how the role needs to keep going in order to move forward during a crisis. Maria Alejandra, can you share with us what you guys did from
Thank you,
PCK?
Gabriela. Thank you, Gabriela and Global America. So first, let me just introduce, it's just like 20 years I've been in the market acquisition talent, helping companies to escalate business. So from that perspective, maybe my role is much more activate the private sector, and I'm a board member of the American Chamber. So my first role as a leader in the country was to activate everything that we have to enhance as private sector, and we start activating the ONGs, the compliance issues, how to really relate the right policies out of a private sector to really enroll for the challenge that we have, because it was an immense challenge. And if this has happened in any country in the world, in any country in Latin America, maybe it's the same mistakes in the first 7 days would have happened the same. So my first role was to normalize mistakes, because that's from there you could build really what right now Venezuelan people have shown the world that we're capable of doing.
That's certainly a great point, Maria Alejandra. Thank you for sharing that. So what's becoming clear is that resilience looks like depending on where you sit. But in every case, we can see that resilience was built long before this earthquake in terms of private sector leadership in Venezuela, right? So let's unpack what this looks like in practice. I'm going to shift to a specific question to Lorena from Puro Lomo so that she can share with us specifically, from your perspective, what has it taken operationally to keep that supply chain running after the earthquake? And how do you see this emergency will affect your supply chain and your operations in the coming mid to long term?
Well, I think I go back to that early response. Operations have not been paralyzed and the supply chain has not suffered significant disruption. I think that's part of like the most important message that I want to leave, in the sense that we take very seriously the responsibility we have towards food safety in the country. Logistics, productions plants, distribution, they continue to function normally, even under the current shock. This is not a coincidence. It is a result of contingency protocols and like that we have refined over decades, almost 6 decades now, of crisis scenarios. For example, hyperinflation, sanctions, even a national blackout. And that accumulated operational like muscle is precisely what allowed us to respond quickly without compromising the safety of our workers. Even when perhaps an institutional response was a bit slower than we would have liked. However, there is a point of exposure, and that's kind of what you were asking, Gabriela. If the disruption were to extend beyond a few weeks, it is not the internal capacity of the company, but rather the external factors that we're worried about. For example, fuel access, stability of distribution routes, and availability of like imported inputs, basically. In other words, I think that our resilience and our processes are very much proven, but it is not immune to a broader ecosystem that we depend on.
Thank you, Lorena. Thank you for bringing us that supply side perspective. And I think that's great that you have managed to maintain operations in a more like normal way, right? I want to shift the conversation now to the demand side. And I bring in Agustin here for that, to tell us a bit about how do you see, or how have you seen since the earthquake, consumer behavior changes? And also private lending. I know that you have a platform called Credit Total that offers financing for your clients. So can you tell us a bit about that perspective, please?
Yes. So, in the days following the earthquake, we observed a clear shift in consumer behaviors. Purchase and move decisively toward essential goods and dry food, personal care products, and pharmaceuticals became the primary focus. We also saw strong demand for household items such pillows, mattresses, and blankets, and as well as essential clothing, with much of which was purchased for donation purpose. On the lending side, we are experienced with Credit Total, our private lending platform with over 1 million users, shipped our responsive directly. We exempted late payments free and increased credit limits for customers located in affected areas. A natural disaster of this scale inevitable lengthens payment cycles, and expected to consumer will need greater purchasing power during the recovery period.
Thank you, Agustin, for sharing this. I certainly think that for chains like you, Mundo Total, maintaining operations and helping your employees and being able to keep the role going, it's really important, because that also helped us a lot in mobilizing as a social society and helping every initiative, from rescuers to first responders to any type of, let's say, NGO that needed help. So thank you for everything that you have done. I want to shift now to Maria Alejandra to talk about one of the most important things that I think was key during this entire emergency, and turned into the topic of the people, right? So Maria Alejandra, your work advising organizations on executive leadership gives you a unique perspective on the talent needed for reconstruction. So as reconstruction begins to move from emergency response to long-term recovery, what kind of leadership will Venezuela need the most? Do you see the country's talent pipeline ready to meet that challenge? Or do you think there's still critical gaps?
Well, the first answer is yes, we're totally ready to meet the challenge. Of course, we need help. And in which part? I mean, there are tons of Venezuelans that are abroad, and we're working on that to really enhance all the opportunities below, okay, to attract tons of those people back into the country. But still, we have a challenge here to develop what we are facing. And we are definitely open to that. If you ask me about leadership, which type of leadership we need to, and we're moving forward, it's from resilience, from a leadership that comes from the vision, okay? Because resilience is always fighting for. Right now, we are, I mean, apart from living in a conditional world, we live from a vision, and we're bringing that vision back to the present. So what's a major street that we have? And we're very passionate people. We really take care for our country, for our people. And that's the type of leadership that right now you're looking. It's a leadership that collaborates. It's a leadership that spends 20%, 30% of their time literally enhancing all the opportunities and mixing the right people and the right partners. And that's one major condition that we need right now, the right partners to really develop what we have and develop the assets that our country and our land have, because we are a very rich country and we just need the right policies and the right compliance and the right structure just to, you know, turn on the volume on the economic recovery. And that started on January 3rd. I mean, it's not going to start right now. We have been 6 months receiving funds, receiving opportunities, and literally enhancing and turning off the business opportunities in Venezuela.
Great point, Maria Alejandra. I couldn't agree more with that. I think that what you mentioned about working together is one of the key things that that help us manage the crisis as a private sector, working with NGOs as well. You know, working all together has proven us that we can do great things, and we can certainly manage anything that comes to our path. So in
And
that
Gabriela,
sense,
just a little.
yes.
Just a little pinpoint there. It's not only about leadership up. I mean, Venezuelan people have leadership from bottom up, and that's what we literally. I mean, all the media, everything was just covering that. I mean, how lower people of the society were waking up, and this is a country that already wake up for what needs to face in the future.
For sure, for sure. I couldn't agree more. Like you could see in the entire emergency, we could see any type of people helping from every window that they had within their capabilities. And that was beautiful to see. And I was able to see it on like a firsthand. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. So looking ahead, what would you say would be 2 things that you think need to happen in order for us to be successful throughout this recovery? Any of you can start. Lorena, maybe you want to start, or Agustin?
All right.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's a great question. If it all goes right, which I hope it does, what I'd like to most see is, and it's gonna sound very cheesy, but it's like a very truly united Venezuela, like where the private sector, the civil society, the institutions, the third sector, we're all working in unison and towards the same direction, without divisions that have like historically held us back. I think that in the past we have had a lot of divisions that have historically held us back, and we need institutions and spaces such as this where we come together, for example, like banks and companies that don't have anything to do with one another, truly coming together and like helping and creating spaces where we can collaborate. It's important to say that like unity isn't a slogan in my perspective. It's a necessary condition for the reconstruction of the country, for sustainable reconstruction that rather than depends solely on the community or the individual company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the future I'd like to see, one where collaboration stops being the exception and like a point where you see it at one point or another, but you don't see it everywhere. I think what Maria Alejandra was saying is very important. We saw that Venezuela woke up. So I'd like for that to keep on going with the right partners and the right decisions and the right collaboration happening.
For sure. I think that we're all aligned in that sense. Coming together has proven to be successful, and we need to keep this moving forward. Agustin, what would you say is key coming forward to our recovery?
Yes, two things I would want to see. First, greater collaboration across the private sector, companies working together and not in silos to improve conditions for employers and customer alike. Second, stronger partnerships between business and institutions. That's very important. Where each side contributes with has real expertise to offer. The future that creates in one where the private sector respond to challenge coordinated force, more effective, more resourceful, and better equipment to create lasting impact than any single company acting alone. That's we are waiting for.
Yeah, I would
Thank you,
say,
Agustin.
Gabriela, in my perspective, I mean, I would love to see a leadership less rhetoric, less blah blah blah, much more actions and solutions. Period. I mean, right now the private sector has shown that it's waking up, and we need to manage with the public sector and with the multilaterals and with the international community. Okay, that this could be a dream that could bring down to actions and dream down to manifestation, and it's like that. So right now we need to the media communications, the brand of a country, everything needs to move forward into the timeline frame, present to future. Okay, it's I mean it's literally it's after and before the earthquake. It's after and before January 3rd. So that's the type of leadership that I would love to see in the country. A leadership that joined together and that we could create conglomerates and communities. I mean, with our capacities, because we are the locals and we know how to manage this country, but we also need the power and the brains and the development of the most developed countries. For instance, in the mining sector, in the oil and gas sector. So that's that we're creating. Okay, and the second part is that we need to really have a leadership of expansion of unlimited opportunities. It's like, yes, we can as a country. So I mean, it's not only played small. The world is small right now. We are like all together, but we need to be a big country because we used to be that big country, and we're going to recover that as a legacy as Venezuelan people as we are. So that's what I would love to find the right partners, the right people, and the right way to connect all each other for what we have in our vision.
Alejandra, just to add a little bit on that, I think that platforms such as Global Americans and having the opportunities to come together to discuss ideas is key to finding that collaboration, right? To work together. We need to build more platforms like this ones. We need to find spaces to share ideas, to share best practices, bad practices as well, learn from each other's mistakes. I think that is absolutely key to move forward.
And I would add for that, Gabriela, that I mean, we are in a technological world. Hello. I mean, we're talking here about a country, about a recovery road, and we're in the middle of a frame. So we have AI, we have technology, we have tons of Venezuelan in lots of the world spread around, but we have brains and we have the technology to connect each other and to create the best policies and the best commitment to what we envision. So that's, I mean, for instance, in my case, in executive search business, I have a CRM and I can attract everyone from everywhere because it's just like a spider web that we just go there and with a click, you have all the candidates. I mean, that's not something that we had 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And that's happening disruption in all the verticals, business verticals. So we have to take advantage of that. I mean, we have a very power engine worldwide that we could just put it in the service for one country, for our people, for Venezuelan to really make us great.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. We are going to go to close this panel. Thank you, Lorena, Maria Alejandra, and Agustin for a great discussion. So we have seen what private sector brings far more than capital to the reconstruction efforts. And it brings operational experience, market knowledge, leadership, and the ability to adapt to any type of circumstances. Those capabilities will be just as important as financing in shaping Venezuela's recovery. So I now shift the conversation and I give the word to a great friend of mine, Tony Frandier from Ecosistema, a great journalist. So Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabi, and thank you everybody for being here. We already talked about who financed the recovery and how the private sector is organizing its response. But this last panel is about what's underneath both, the civic networks and the organized citizens who moved before any institution or even company had a place in place. We're talking about NGOs, churches, schools, neighborhood associations, etc. The days after the earthquake, we saw how private companies turned their ordinary infrastructure into critical infrastructure. We saw how civil society created open source platforms to register missing people and record local needs or damages to the buildings. Influencers turned their feeds into real-time information hubs and amplified calls for help and shared missing person reports. And in short, practically, WhatsApp groups and Instagram accounts ended up doing what Venezuelan institutions could not. So to discuss this, we're going to talk today with Leslie Simon, the president of the Venezuelan American Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Alberto Blohm, the managing director of NGO Alimenta la Solidaridad, Daniela Contreras, who created the platform Efecto Red that connects Venezuelan professionals like psychologists and engineers to volunteer with people affected by the earthquake, and Sofia Saavedra, who is the CEO of brands like Cobas, Hero, and Samos, but is also a very important social media personality in Venezuela. So thank you for being here. And I'm going to start with Leslie. During the days after the earthquake, the Venezuelan American Chamber of Commerce moved quickly on fundraiser for search and rescue equipment and medical supplies and other critical needs. This shows how the Venezuelan diaspora has spent years building the know-how and the networks to fill the gaps back home. How did that experience shape your response after the earthquake? And what did it allow the diaspora to do in those first critical days that would have been much harder without those pre-existing relationships?
Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you for this invitation today. When a disaster strikes, no, speed matters. And then, but coordination matters more. So, thanks God, we have a very trusted relationship with business leaders, humanitarian organization, logistics, volunteers. So we were able to activate that immediately. Actually, after January 3rd, all of us have been thinking about how we can support Venezuela and how can we work in Venezuela, and it's much easier in a much easier way. So it was like when we had the call, and then everybody just in 1 second, everybody was thinking of what we can do. And when, for example, if you have medical supplies, we have a partner who is Venezuelan American Medical Association. It's an organization for more than 30 years who have been working with humanitarian crisis. And then we have VAFA, who is Venezuelan American Freight Forward. And then there's more than 40 forward companies, couriers who have been working together and putting all those supplies and sending them to Venezuela. And then we have all business who, like Helios Optical, Ariocava, Pana Stores, Amerant, Ocean Bank, and South Day Toyota and South Day Kia, they have been all supplies organizations. Their stores has been to bring all the supplies. It's that they have been funding. So when we begin raising the funds, the first thing that it was much easier for us is to speak with a lot of organizations that are on ground, and then ask them what they need, not what we thought they need. And then the first matter is they need medical supplies, they need transportation, they need security, and unfortunately, they also need equipment for reserve. I was thinking why we have to buy equipment to rescue, but thanks God they were able to handle that, and it's in some way we were also supporting the local business. That's one of our also priorities, and now we're going like in another phase. But what we are doing is that, like that emergency, it's we had funds for the emergency. Now we have funds to thinking about the reconstruction and relocation, and that's what matters most in this moment.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And you mentioned coordination with organizations on the ground. So now we're going to talk about the response from the ground. And the next question is for Sophia. Sophia, you built commercial success and a large following on TikTok and Instagram before the earthquake. How did you convert an audience built for content and commerce into an operational volunteer and donation channel within hours?
Hello, Global Americans. Hello, Tony. Thank you for the question. I think in the first hours following the disaster, I realized there were no official reports or journalists or humanitarian channels that were active. So in the first 4 hours, I realized that the information wasn't like flowing, and people were desperate to know what happened in La Guaira, what happened to the families and the members that were missing, where were the buildings that were collapsed. So in the first 4 hours, I started to post a lot, but like managing that the information was real, because it's important like not to put information that I could not verify. So the first 4 hours I start posting so community could connect and know what buildings were collapsed, because the La Guaira was completely cut off. So the thing that I could like shift my community is that I have a trusted community that trusted in me. That I think the transparency was very important for people to trust in what I was saying and the information I was saying. I think that was super important, and not to see like the metrics that I use my platforms to sell or to anything, just like the community that trusted me. And seeing the immense scale of the crisis, I knew I couldn't wait for like a formal plan. And so drawing my years of experience in social work before I had my companies, I think was instrumental for me to organize under extreme pressure what to do in this crisis. So the first thing was like to communicate to people the buildings collapsed. In the first 14 hours, I had my base of 89 buildings collapse. So I could tell people these buildings collapsed in La Guaira, so they could know what people were missing or if their family members were there. So people really step up, and I think this disaster highlighted that people were able to help, and they were wanting to help. So for me, this massive platform I knew I have to convert it to help this crisis out, because people didn't have information in real time, especially in the first hours. So I think that was critical for me to go to the hospitals on the first 14 hours and ask them what do they need. So because people didn't know what was happening or where to go or what to donate. So without like the formal plans, I had to set up and did with my platform a very not journalist, not a ONG, but to help out the most people I could.
Thank you, Sophia. And it makes me think about how you're saying that in the first hours, you managed to create practically a registry of the buildings that collapsed through your followers and their information. So now I would like to talk with Daniela regarding digital platforms. So Daniela created a platform called Efecto Red, which connects critical professionals with people affected by the earthquakes to volunteer during the week's aftermath. So Daniela, Venezuela's tech community is highly distributed, with developers inside and outside the country collaborating online. So how important are those decentralized, open source, even AI-enabled networks to fill the gaps during the emergency? And what does that says about the future of civic technology in Venezuela?
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much. So first, as I think was Maria Alejandra who mentioned that we live in a tech world and with AI. So once all this happened, the first thing that crossed my mind was that we needed a platform to connect people, not only now during the problem, but also in the future. So I didn't hesitate, and I just went. I spent a night coding and doing stuff, and I launched the platform. And since the very beginning, it has traction. Um, it's been crazy. Also, after I think 72 hours, I partner with Dummy, the super app in Venezuela, and this have given us a lot of visualization and exposure to people. And this basically shows and validate that there's a problem, and there was a problem before, but there's now more things happening. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Daniela. And now we're going to go with Alberto. So, Alberto, you work at Alimenta la Solidaridad, which has a model that runs through, networks of mothers in vulnerable areas and communities' kitchens in these areas that existed long before the earthquake. And while these types of organizations have proved indispensable in the aftermath of the earthquake, NGOs in Venezuela operate under significant institutional and regulatory constraints, including recent laws that have narrowed their operating space. So how does the limitations affect the response, and what would need to change for civil society to play an even more effective role in future disasters and community reconstruction in Venezuela?
Cool. Thank you, Tony. And yeah, for sure, we've been operating the last 10 years in a very limited space for the NGOs. But I think sadly, it's been an opportunity for the civil space to try to demonstrate the importance of how our networks can react quickly, right? For example, we have been operating in La Guaira for 9 years now, and our first reaction was to try to protect our own people, like places where we had community kitchens before, our own leader network, and it's been very useful because the only way to have like live data of what's happening in La Guaira is because we have those leaders and we have deployed about like 70 Starlink antennas to have the connection live with them to try to understand what's happening. And I think, and I've seen a lot of space for cooperation with international NGOs, the Venezuelan interim government, the US government, and civil society has been it's an important role because we are the ones there. Like every time you go to places like Tanaguarenas, Caraballeda, Catelamar, where most like the affected people live, you'll find a teacher, you'll find a community leader, you'll find a priest, and there's the ones who are there every day, every night, working for the community. So I think it's been bad for 10 years for us, and the thing is, the reality is that we have been trained and work and we're prepared for things like this. And now finally, and I keep repeating sadly, but finally we have the opportunity to have a space to collaborate and to show the importance that the civil networks can have in context like this.
Thank you so much for such a thoughtful answer, Alberto. Now I'm gonna go with a question for everybody, and you can all answer it one by one, and then we'll try to have some time for the public if there's still time. So the question for all is that responses to the earthquake mobilized through both formal diaspora organizations, NGOs, startups, the horizontal social media networks built around personal communities like Sophia's. So what unique strength did those decentralized networks bring in the first days of the crisis, and what can they do well that traditional institutions often can't? And what could traditional institutions do that these networks can't and are limited? So I'm gonna start with Leslie first.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to take it from what Alberto said. No, there are so many organizations in Venezuela who have been working for so many years, and most of them are there are people who call me that I didn't know that this organization existed. I didn't know that this other organization existed. I have personally been more than 30 years working with different organizations through all Venezuela. So when you see that, and then the diaspora, because the diaspora is Venezuela's greatest asset. So put those things together. I really think that's why this sadly say it, but it has to be on ground of success. And I really think that is something that's gonna last. But I really and I would love to say this, and that I hope that we can see that philanthropy become part of our business, because the philanthropy we have tremendous capacity to create jobs and economic opportunity, but we also can lead in a moment of crisis like this. So I really have to take this opportunity to say thank you, not only to Venezuelan diaspora, the whole world community. In one moment and I have to say thank you to the tech platforms, the social media. We knew about this, and just in 1 hour we were able to lead and put all our assets to work with this crisis. And in my case, where we live in Miami, in all the Miami's different communities and different organizations has been working very, very hard through all the different organizations that are working on ground in Venezuela. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to become a very strong assets for all of us, and we're going to see very soon Venezuelans recovery.
Thank you, Leslie. Now I'm gonna go with the same question, but to Sophia.
Yeah, I think people on the ground were critical in the first hours because people could not respond from outside or the diaspora, but people here was the one that had to confront the reality of the situation. And I think in the long term, the informal channel, or what we call like my platform, or people that go and help individually, was the sprint on, because we don't have the bureaucracy to complete the urgent task, but I don't think it's sustainable on the long term. We are seeing after 2 weeks that people needs to return to their work or normal tasks, and they cannot keep volunteering. But in the first 72 hours, they were very important, and they were crucial to test the emergency. But I think the formal channel and the institutions possess the infrastructure required to run the marathon, to recover Venezuelans and to recover the country after the earthquake. But I do think that large the large following of people can easily develop into chaos without structure. So the key to converting those passive followers into active operational volunteers was the decentralization and a clear role of allocations. So I knew my boundaries, because I'm a marketer and an entrepreneur. I don't have like a medical background, but people have a lot of friction with bureaucracy and some institutions where they don't know if there's clear that the donations will go. So people want transparency, and I think social media gives that like you feel closer to the people, to the person, so you can show them where their donation is going or where the things are going. So I do think the which provide faster, it was on the informal side, but I think on the long run infrastructure is needed, and good ONGs and good companies that can help rebuild the country aside people without a structure.
Thank you, Sophia. Now I'm gonna go with Daniela.
Super. So, in my opinion, what decentralized networks like, for example, Effecto Red brought in the first days was speed and zero friction. So when I built the first version, the day after the earthquake happened, there was no like bureaucracy, no approval chains, just responding to what was needed in real time. So, for example, when someone needs help right now, they can't wait for a normal process to be set up. So they need to search and message someone directly. And these networks also carry trust that's already built in, people helping their own community professional from the diaspora who wanted to give back immediately, and that personal motivation moved faster than any institution can mobilize. And lastly, in my opinion as well, what traditional institutions can do that we can't is scale, like funding and accountability. So they can verify at a level we are still building toward. They have like this infrastructure for the long term, and also the legal and financial structure to sustain these for years, not just for weeks. And I think also the fastest responding the first 72 hours came from networks like ours, but rebuilding Venezuela over years needs both, and that's exactly like why conversation like this, for example, matters.
Thank you, Daniela. And now I'm gonna go with Alberto to finish this round before we take one or two questions from the public in the Q&A.
Cool.
Alberto?
I'll probably won't say anything new, but what I'm sure is that those lives that were saved the first 72 hours is because we have the ability to fundraise really quickly. We did it in 25 hours, in 24 hours. The diaspora, the Venezuelan diaspora, was there like to send money, some help, and we have then the flexibility to buy shovels, picks, or tools that were needed for the rescue teams who were there on the ground. You cannot do that probably with traditional funds and traditional institutions. That's going to be important on the medium term. And for example, us, we're waiting still for approvals on funds we are trying to get for the recovery. But right now we're responding. I think there's nothing like the flexibility of like startups or NGOs, and I wanna highlight again, and Leslie was building on that. The Venezuelan diaspora was the first to support, and the Venezuelans in Venezuela were the first to react. So I think that match, it's probably what saved so many lives in the first 72 hours.
Thank you so much, Alberto. So we have 15 minutes, and I'm gonna take some questions from the Q&A in the chat, and I'm gonna mix two questions into one for Alberto actually. Alberto, someone is asking, what can be done to improve the send of help and donations to be actually received to organizations that are actually doing the work and will send the supplies to the victims? And this person also asked, how can we avoid the same mistakes that were made in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010 that ended up turning Haiti into a failed state?
So first, I think I'm glad the way the world has been responding to the emergency in Venezuela. I think what we're seeing right now, we're still giving the bureaucracy. I think there's good news about the funds being approved. And we see multilateral banks too moving quickly into Venezuela, even though in a context where the humanitarian war, like worldwide, is in a crisis, right? After 2025, when USA was kind of like was out of the picture, the humanitarian war entered a crisis, and it's a war that's still trying to understand itself. So it's hard to read still because we've been like this happened 2 weeks ago, but what I understand is there is a lot of news. And then Haiti, and I've been to Haiti, I saw there in first person the mess that it was after the earthquake. Um, I think Venezuela, like the Venezuelan government and the U.S. government, need to learn from what happened in Haiti because the humanitarian architecture we have right now in place is kind of the same, and I feel that we are repeating what's happening in Haiti in the earthquake. So to answer your question and not just like bringing bad news, I think the NGOs, like the local NGOs for sure, the ones that are going to be here today, tomorrow, and in 10 years, we are the ones called to lead what's going to happen in Venezuela. I think the UN has been talking for 10 years about localization and the importance of local NGOs. So what I think is that given the nature of what happened and the crisis that Venezuela has been through the last 10 years, so it's time for the civil society to support their local NGOs and push them to be the ones leading the response. I think there's the knowledge is there. The people I've met for 10 years are the ones that are still working on the field. So I think we have to support our own people, our own staff, and probably left that thought that people that are coming from abroad are the ones that know how to do it. We are the ones that we know how to do it. So I think we need to support our own people, like leading the response.
Thank you so much, Alberto, and I completely agree. The know-how of people operating on the ground, both in NGOs and the private sector, is quite fundamental and will be fundamental for the following years in Venezuela. So the next question from the Q&A is for Leslie. Leslie, they're saying that you mentioned the diaspora was critical, but there is a growing anti-immigration sentiment throughout the world. We're seeing it in both South America and North America. So how can the diaspora effectively act if sometimes they don't have a solid ground to stand or to send aid back to Venezuela?
Well, I think that first, if you have seen not only the Venezuelan diaspora answer on this crisis, you see the whole community. I think they put on the side of that. So we have come all together like one country. It's amazing how the response for communities that probably never spoke about Venezuela or that had, as you said, some issues with Venezuela, and the response was amazing. And then you listen to them how they want to work with Venezuelans organization on ground, because they know, as Alberto said, those are the one who's gonna last forever, because we're never gonna leave Venezuela. And then there, on the other side, here in the States, we know that there is an immigration crisis, unfortunately, and there's other organizations who are working very hard, where the official electors to support the Venezuelan community, and then see how this crisis we are all living, can move forward and support them. So I really think that we're going to see a few changes in all the immigration crisis in different countries.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And now we're gonna finish with one last question in the last 10 minutes we have. So this one is open. Whoever wants to answer it can raise the hand of the five speakers. And it's a lot of people in the comments, in the Q&As, are asking, how can we act effectively or respond when Venezuela has a political, institutional, regulatory crisis and quite complex context? So of course, the whole dimension of politics and institutions in the country and how they limit the response and how can we act. I'm summarizing a lot of the questions. So who wants to answer that one? And we can finish with that one. Well, Maria Alejandra, you're not part of my panel, but you raise your hand, so go ahead. You're muted.
So I would suggest, in that part, let us lower the noise of what is not to be noise anymore. On January 3rd, everything changed, and Venezuela is a different country. Of course, we have an interim management government that it has already been changing.
Maria, we're losing you. Well, underwater cable was affected by the earthquake in Venezuela, so that's probably part of the reason we're losing Mariale.
No, it's not an earthquake. It's an intervention of a phone call. Yeah, no, it's not an internet. It was a phone call that just came into, because I'm connected with a cell phone. So what I was going to tell you is that definitely, we have to lower the noise of what's really happening. And apart from January 3rd, everything has been changing in the country, even though the actual government has been changing. And you could look at it, all the changes that we have had. And of course, we are in a transition, and that transition could last 1 year, 2 years, and maybe not with the current government, maybe with a transition government that it's going to be taking place. So at the end, if you lower the noise, and that's what lots of multilaterals and especially funds are doing, and they're signing CPPs, they're signing mining sectors. There are tons of funds that are arriving, and they've already investing in our country. Those are the first in. And in a country, as it's a kind of a Silicon Valley, the first in is the first that's going to have the advantage in the ground. So that's something that is going to happen. I mean, the first that really can sustain the risk of what is happening, that is not at all a risk. I mean, we have godfathers all around the world. You see it right now. There are tons of governments that are really helping Venezuela, but it's because, I mean, we have a humanitarian crisis, but also we have a very
Marielle, we lost you for a moment. No, still. You're muted. Well, the sound is off and we're gonna have to close. Sophia has a comment to finish.
Yeah, I wanted to tell, like, I think people were asking how can they help, and they know that the things are going to that exact person. And I think for normal people not to be like super tired of helping because you have your routine and your work, I think a good plan is to say like, I will help this family in specific for a specific period of time with these necessities. Maybe it's a hygiene products or something, and also with trusted NGOs. I think Alimenta la Solidaridad, Hogar Bambi, and other networks that you know that they're helping on the ground. It's also very good for help. But if they want to do it on particular, I think to put on our routine helping out others, because this is not a short thing, this is a long-term thing. So people will need help not 2 weeks after this, but for months and maybe years. So I think it's critical for private sectors and civic people to work and help these people. So I think to like destinize the help and not try to do everything, just like I will only help doing hygiene products for 3 months, or I will help Alimenta la Solidaridad with this for 3-4 months, and like put it on a time so you can actually help. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Leslie, we have 4 minutes, so I'm gonna ask you to be short and precise with that one, and we can finish now.
This is going to be very quickly. I
Okay.
really think we are ensuring transparency and accountability. So following that, we please don't follow don't spread fake news. And the other thing that I ask is that go to the webpage and to the different social media platforms that organizations like the Venezuelan American Chamber of Commerce Foundation has, like Alimenta la Solidaridad has, like Sofia, like Daniela, because those are the ones that you're gonna see what's going on with all the funds that you have we are raising, or with of all the aids that you have donated. Because if we spread the fake news, then we are becoming part of the problem and not of the solution. So please, I really ask to everybody to, and inclusive, follow the U.S. Embassy news, follow We Love Foundation news, and then well, I have a large list of different organizations that are spreading the good news, are spreading how the funds has been raised and how the funds are going to be used. And please don't spread the fake news.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Yes, please read verified journalists and verified outlets. And thank you so much. And thank you everybody for the Q&As. There's a lot of interesting questions, but we don't have enough time today. So we have to finish now. And today what we heard across is a single thought line. So Venezuela's civic and private sector infrastructure, built out of necessity after years of crisis, is often faster and more adaptive than the formal systems that are layered over it. So that is the capacity these conversations arcs that the reconstruction efforts need to build with, not around. So I hope you take this in mind and continue talking about Venezuela and mobilizing efforts to keep supporting the country in the following weeks and months. And thank you all for being here and for joining this conversation of Global Americans. See you another time. Thank you.